January 26, 1945, Haute-Sphère, France. A weary German soldier from the 2nd Mountain Division looked out a small aid station window, watching medics hustle in with the latest wounded. His unit had just launched an attack, 250 men and 6 tanks, all to stop a single American lieutenant perched on a burning M10 tank destroyer. The American had 1 machine gun. Within an hour, the German force was shattered, reduced to a mere 70 effective soldiers. The survivors spoke of nothing else but the terrifying weapon that had stopped them dead. It wasn't a secret Nazi wonder weapon or a technological marvel forged in German labs. It was a simple American machine gun that had first rolled off the assembly line back in 1933. Yet, this weapon, the Browning M2 50 caliber heavy machine gun, was quickly becoming the most feared piece of equipment in the American arsenal, not because of its complexity, but because of its brutal, relentless efficiency. The German survivors had just witnessed what would become one of the most legendary engagements in American military history. First Lieutenant Audie Murphy, wounded and alone, had climbed aboard the flaming tank destroyer and turned its turret-mounted 50 caliber machine gun on an entire German infantry company supported by armor. For over an hour, Murphy poured fire into the enemy with such devastating effect that the German attack simply disintegrated. The official Medal of Honor citation, awarded by Lieutenant General Alexander Patch on June 2, 1945, confirmed that Murphy inflicted approximately 50 casualties on the attacking force. The medical horror of a heavy round, the wounds caused by the 50 caliber impacts were grimly familiar to German medical personnel. Unlike a rifle round that might wound and allow for recovery, the massive kinetic energy transfer of the 50 caliber projectile caused catastrophic tissue damage. A hit to a limb often necessitated amputation. A strike to the torso was almost invariably fatal. Field hospitals near the front learned to recognize 50 caliber casualties by the sheer scale of the wounds. There was little medical staff could do but offer comfort and attempt to stabilize patients for evacuation. Many never made it that far. The terror extended beyond the physical wounds. German units subjected to sustained 50 caliber fire suffered psychological casualties, combat exhaustion, and a breakdown of unit cohesion at far higher rates than those facing conventional small arms. Medical officers noted that soldiers who had survived repeated 50 caliber attacks, even without being physically wounded, showed signs of severe stress. The terrifying knowledge that no amount of cover could guarantee survival, that luck, not skill determined life or death, created a debilitating sense of helplessness. The sound of doom, air superiority. The Haute-Sphère action was no isolated event. From the dense hedgerows of Normandy to the frozen forests of the Ardennes, German soldiers learned to recognize and dread a distinctive sound, the deep, rhythmic thunder of the M2 Browning, firing between 450 and 575 rounds per minute. Each massive 50 caliber round carried enough energy to punch through light armor, tear through concrete, and turn human bodies into unrecognizable wreckage. The shift from skepticism to terror had begun 3 years earlier. High in the skies, September 6, 1943, the skies over Stuttgart. 388 B-17 flying fortresses approached Germany's industrial heartland in the first major daylight raid on the city. Luftwaffe fighter units scrambled to intercept. Veteran pilots, confident in their Focke-Wulf 190s armed with 20mm cannons, rolled into their attack runs. At 800 meters, they opened fire. Then, something happened that changed air combat forever. The bombers erupted with fire, not the smoke of damage, but muzzle flashes. Each B-17 carried 13 Browning M2 machine guns. A typical formation of 36 bombers meant 468 heavy machine guns, all firing the same 50 caliber cartridge with a lethal reach of 1,830 meters. The combined defensive firepower of the formation exceeded 6,000 rounds per minute, creating a wall of steel no fighter could safely penetrate. Luftwaffe pilots felt their aircraft shudder as 50 caliber rounds tore into wings, engine cowlings, and canopies. They broke off their attacks, diving away with aircraft trailing smoke and hydraulic fluid. The raid cost the Luftwaffe heavily. German fighter losses were catastrophic, hitting units that could no longer replace experienced pilots. What they did not yet understand was that they were encountering not just a weapon, but a philosophy of warfare. The Americans had solved the problem of bomber defense not through technological sophistication, but through overwhelming volume of fire. A wall of lead Luftwaffe pilots had been trained to fear 20mm and 30mm cannons, which could destroy a bomber with a single explosive shot. The American .50 caliber didn't explode. It didn't need to. The massive half-inch diameter projectile simply punched holes in everything it touched: wings, engines, fuel tanks, and pilots. By October 1943, fighter units understood the true danger. Oberleutnant Heinrich Wormhele, an ace, wrote to his family, "To attack the Americans is to fly through a storm of steel. You see the tracers, 1 round in 5, and you know that for every tracer you see, 4 more bullets you cannot see are flying past. When you close to effective cannon range, you are already inside their killing zone." The Germans adapted their tactics, trying head-on attacks, diving from above, and climbing from below. Nothing worked consistently. The American gunners had overlapping fields of fire. The U.S. Army Air Forces had arranged their combat box formations precisely to maximize this defensive coverage. Reliability versus sophistication. But the real horror wasn't the volume of fire. It was the reliability. German cannons were prone to jamming, especially in the cold, high-altitude air. The American Browning M2, by contrast, simply worked. It fired continuously for hours, operating in extreme temperatures. It kept shooting even when hit by cannon fire. After the war, Lieutenant Wolfgang Fischer, a Ju-88 pilot, testified, "We called the American bomber formations Die Fliegenden Festungen, the flying fortresses. But what made them true fortresses was not their armor or their formation discipline. It was those .50 caliber machine guns that never stopped firing, never jammed, never gave us an opening. We lost so many pilots, not to American fighters, but to the bomber defensive fire. It was like flying into a meat grinder." The Ground War, universal coverage. The Ground War told the same story with different details. June 6, 1944, Normandy. Oberst Hans von Luck, a decorated officer commanding elements of the 21st Panzer Division, was among the first German units to encounter sustained American ground combat. Von Luck quickly learned that American doctrine had placed the .50 caliber machine gun on virtually every combat vehicle: jeeps, trucks, half-tracks, and tanks. The Americans had achieved something the Germans never attempted: universal heavy machine gun coverage across their entire force structure. Von Luck later wrote in his memoir, "We had been told our training and our tactical doctrine would overcome American material advantage. At Normandy I learned the truth. The Americans did not need superior tactics. They had enough ammunition to make mistakes and still win. We could not move in daylight. Any attempt to maneuver drew immediate and overwhelming fire. The German army had built its infantry doctrine around the machine gun, with the MG-42 firing at 1/200 rounds per minute, earning it the nickname Hitler's buzzsaw. But they had never imagined the scale of American .50 caliber employment. An advancing American armored division would have hundreds of M2s mounted on its vehicles. Reconnaissance by fire American units employed a terrifying tactic they called reconnaissance by fire. Instead of carefully advancing and waiting for the enemy to reveal positions, they would fire their .50 caliber machine guns continuously into any suspicious location: tree lines, farm buildings, stone walls. The sheer volume of fire would either suppress hidden German positions or provoke a return volley that revealed their locations. German infantry veterans of the Eastern Front, who thought they had seen the worst of industrial warfare, encountered a new type of horror in France. Captured German squad leaders described the difference. Against the Americans, we faced machine gun fire that never stopped. They fired at everything. They fired at nothing. They fired to make us keep our heads down. They fired because they had unlimited ammunition, and we did not. After 2 weeks of fighting, many German soldiers would not leave cover during daylight. As one prisoner explained, it was not cowardice. It was mathematics. Movement meant death, the ultimate defense. Convoys and the quad-mount, the M16 multiple-gun motor. Carriage, a half-track mounting 450 caliber machine guns in a powered turret, demonstrated American firepower philosophy at its most extreme. Its combined rate of fire approached 2,200 rounds per minute. American soldiers called it the meat chopper, or the Kraut mower. Originally an anti-aircraft weapon, it was repurposed for ground troops by late 1944. During the Battle of the Bulge, These M16 units were credited with breaking up numerous German infantry attacks, simply by traversing their four-gun mounts across the attacking formations. The experience of ambushing American convoys perfectly illustrates why the .50 caliber became so hated. German ambush doctrine, which had worked against British and Soviet supply lines, failed catastrophically against the Americans. American convoy doctrine placed .50 caliber armed vehicles at intervals throughout the column. When an ambush began, they would immediately return fire with such intensity that German ambush teams frequently suffered heavier casualties than the convoys they attacked. The most devastating tactic was the pattern of alternating fire, one vehicle shooting right, the next shooting left, creating intersecting fields of fire that simultaneously covered both flanks. German forces trying to ambush from one side would find themselves under fire, not only from that side of the convoy, but from the opposite side as well. The psychological effect of being under fire from multiple directions by weapons that could penetrate cover and had seemingly unlimited ammunition made successful ambushes nearly impossible. The mathematical power of American industrial might was ultimately written in the experience of the German soldiers who faced the M2 Browning and survived. They discovered a profound truth about American military doctrine. The United States hadn't built the most sophisticated heavy machine gun. They had built something far more dangerous. They had built the most reliable, most ubiquitous, and most psychologically devastating crew-served weapon in history. The engine of war, logistics and firepower. German forces in France, and later in Germany, found themselves unable to effectively interrupt American logistics. While the German military was constantly planning around chronic shortages of ammunition, fuel, and supplies, American units could count on regular, massive resupply. This meant American tactical planners could assume that overwhelming firepower would always be available. The .50 caliber machine gun was both a symbol and a tool of this logistical superiority. It was devastating because American industry could produce ammunition in vast quantities. Its reliability meant that once that ammunition arrived, it would be effectively employed. German soldiers watching American tracer fire arc across the night sky understood they were witnessing not just wasted bullets, but the visible, fiery proof of an industrial capacity they simply could not match. The rainstorm of metal, air-delivered terror, the terror from the air added another, more immediate dimension to the fear of the .50 caliber. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, nicknamed the Jug by its pilots, carried 8 Browning M2 machine guns in its wings. This meant a single fighter could deliver a combined 4,400 rounds per minute during strafing runs. A flight of 4 P-47s could converge 32 heavy machine guns on a target area. German ground troops learned to recognize the distinctive shape of the P-47 and the sound that preceded death. Pilots would approach at high speed and low altitude, opening fire up to 800 meters away, walking their fire across German positions, vehicles, and troop concentrations. Survivors described the effect as a horizontal rainstorm of metal that left nothing intact. A German supply sergeant, captured after the retreat from Normandy in August 1944, described the helplessness. You hear the engines first. By the time you look up, they are already firing. The bullets hit the road, the vehicles, the men, all at once. There is no cover that works. Stone walls crumble. Trees are cut down. Metal tears like paper. You can be behind a truck one moment and the truck is gone the next, just pieces of metal and fire. Soldiers quickly learned to abandon vehicles the moment they heard aircraft engines. Better to lose the truck than the truck and the crew. The P-47's ample ammunition, 3,400 rounds total, allowed for armed reconnaissance missions. Pilots didn't just hit specific targets. They patrolled sectors looking for any opportunity. A pilot might strafe a convoy, spot a tank platoon, dive to attack them, then strafe a crossroads on the way back. German forces were forced to move primarily at night or in bad weather, which crippled their operational tempo. Supplies that should have taken hours took days. Reinforcements arrived late or not at all. By mid-1944, the Luftwaffe's failure to contest American air superiority meant German ground forces operated under constant threat, and the primary weapon delivering that threat was the .50 caliber machine gun. The death of cover, urban combat, the combination of ground-mounted and air-delivered .50 caliber fire created a comprehensive suppression effect that broke German combat effectiveness. They couldn't move safely in daylight because of strafing. They couldn't move safely at night because ground forces used reconnaissance by fire to interdict roads. They couldn't concentrate for counterattacks because American doctrine called for immediate, overwhelming engagement. This was the simple reality that overwhelmed German courage and tactical skill. American forces could deliver superior firepower to any point on the battlefield faster than German forces could respond. In urban combat, the .50 caliber proved invaluable. The massive projectile could penetrate multiple walls of typical European construction. Masonry that would stop rifle fire offered little protection. American tank commanders quickly learned to use their turret-mounted .50 calibers to suppress upper-story windows and rooftops before moving through a town. The technique was simple but devastatingly effective. A tank commander would halt at a street corner and traverse the .50 caliber across building facades, firing continuously at any potential position. This sustained fire would force German defenders to take cover, allowing infantry to advance. German Panzerfaust teams, which were highly dangerous in urban areas, found themselves unable to function. An operator needed to expose himself to aim and fire his weapon, but American doctrine called for continuous .50 caliber fire on any suspected position. A German company commander in the Rhineland described the impossibility of defense. German infantry would position in upper-story rooms. American tanks would approach and destroy the buildings with .50 caliber fire and tank main guns. There was no safe place. Soldiers would take cover behind furniture or interior walls, and the bullets would find them anyway. The psychological comfort of seeking shelter behind solid objects was destroyed. Watching .50 caliber rounds punch through thick stone walls destroyed the psychological comfort that shelter normally provided. Soldiers felt exposed even when hidden. Eventually, the cumulative stress of knowing that no position was truly safe broke combat effectiveness. Units would abandon positions without being directly assaulted, knowing that American firepower would inevitably make them untenable. The final campaigns proved the complete superiority of American firepower doctrine. The .50 caliber machine gun was the foundation of this success. It was present everywhere, reliable enough to fire continuously for hours, and supplied with so much ammunition that American commanders never had to ration its use. The night terror, watching death arrive, a German Panzerfaust team might manage to disable an American tank, only to be cut down by .50 caliber fire from accompanying tank destroyers or infantry support vehicles before they could even escape. But it was in night combat that the .50 caliber introduced yet another layer of terror. American ammunition used a ratio of 1 tracer round to every 4 ball rounds. This meant every 5th bullet was a glowing streak that marked the trajectory of the burst. German soldiers watching at night saw these streaks of light arcing toward them, lights that seemed slow enough to track visually, but which arrived with devastating speed and force. The psychological effect was profound. Soldiers could see death approaching. They could watch the tracers converge on their position. They knew that for every tracer they saw, 4 invisible rounds were flying along the exact same path. The human instinct to duck or dodge was useless. By the time a soldier saw the tracer, the rounds had already arrived. While veterans learned not to watch, new replacements would often fixate on the deadly light show, freezing in the open until the fire found them. American forces exploited this deliberately. Reconnaissance by fire at night meant sending torrents of tracer-laden .50 caliber fire across suspected positions. The visual effect was overwhelming. Entire sectors would light up with intersecting streams of light. Captured German infantry squad leaders near Aachen described the hellish environment. At night, you can see them shooting even when they cannot see you. The traces show you where death is coming from, and you cannot escape it. You see 10 streaks of light and know 40 more rounds are in the air. Then you realize there are not 1, but 5 or 10 guns firing. The mathematics of it are terrifying. You cannot survive that volume of fire by skill or courage. You survive by luck alone. The breakdown. When firepower trumps skill, German tactical doctrine, based on resource scarcity, meant their own tracers were used sparingly to conserve more expensive rounds. American crews, however, fired mixed belts continuously. This visual dominance had a practical advantage. American commanders could observe and adjust their fire in real time. If tracers fell short, the gunner corrected immediately. Since German return fire was harder to observe, American units had better feedback, allowing them to concentrate fire more effectively. The Germans tried countermeasures, more aggressive armor attacks, nighttime infiltration, but American logistics ensured 50 caliber ammunition was always available, and American doctrine encouraged firing at any suspected position. The general's assessment following Operation Cobra in July 1944, the American breakout from Normandy, General Major Fritz Bayerlein, commander of an elite panzer division, provided a devastating assessment. He wrote that his division was decimated not primarily by bombing or artillery, but by the cumulative effect of constant small arms fire that prevented his forces from maneuvering effectively. His conclusion was blunt. The Americans had solved the fundamental problem of modern warfare. They had found a way to project superior firepower without requiring superior training or tactics. The 50 caliber, operated by soldiers with minimal specialized training and supplied with vast quantities of ammunition, created a baseline of firepower the Germans, with their more sophisticated weapons and better trained crews, simply could not match. The Bulge and the cold reality. The Battle of the Bulge was Germany's last desperate offensive. Initial surprise created temporary success, but then American logistics reasserted itself, bringing with it the 50 caliber. Even improvised defensive positions brought devastating volumes of heavy machine gun fire to bear, reliably operating despite sub-freezing temperatures, snow, and mud. German planners had gambled that bad weather would ground American air power. They were half right, but they hadn't accounted for the fact that the ground-mounted 50 caliber machine guns were unaffected by the weather, and that American logistics could sustain ammunition expenditure at rates the Germans found incomprehensible. By early 1945, German commanders like General Alfred Schlemm noted that soldiers had learned to recognize the sound of the M2 from great distances, the constant knowledge that any position could be engaged, that any movement would draw immediate fire, and that there was no effective counter, created a defensive mentality that made offensive operations nearly impossible. The weapon and the system the M2 Browning's enduring effectiveness lay in its simplicity and industrial, backing feature specification, impact on German forces effective. Range 1-830 meters, approx engaged. Targets beyond the range of German rifles and light machine guns. Muzzle velocity 9-10. FTS, standard ball high energy transfer, caused catastrophic wounds. Armor penetration up to 21 and at 500 meters. API could penetrate half-tracks, armored cars, and the side rear armor of many tanks, as well as light fortifications. Reliability extremely high in all conditions, fired continuously, never jammed, creating constant suppression. American manufacturers produced nearly 2 million 50 caliber machine guns during the war years. This scale meant that the M2 was ubiquitous, 13 per bomber, 8 per fighter, and at least one on every combat vehicle. The Germans understood that their own weapons were, in some respects, more sophisticated, but sophistication meant nothing in the face of overwhelming material superiority. The Americans had built a weapon that was good enough for every role and produced it in quantities that allowed for universal employment. The hatred German soldiers expressed for the 50 caliber was the resentment of craftsmen facing mass production. The Americans simply deployed overwhelming material resources and fired until resistance collapsed. The lesson of the M2 Browning was universal and unforgiving. In industrial warfare, the side that can sustain higher material expenditure will prevail, regardless of tactical skill disparities. The Germans brought a craftsman's approach to a mass production war. The Americans brought an industrial system capable of producing and supplying heavy machine guns in quantities that made resistance mathematically futile.